So today I'm very happy to host Zsuzsanna Szelényi, Hungarian politician, writer, public intellectual, former member of parliament, and one of the most vocal critics of Viktor Orbán and his rule. With Zsuzsanna, we'll be talking about her newly released book, Tainted Democracy. I have it here, Viktor Orbán and the Subversion of Hungary, published by Hearst at the end of last year.
Zsuzsanna Szelényi is a Hungarian foreign policy specialist and former politician, currently director at the Democracy Institute Leadership Academy of the Central European University. She started her political career in 1988 as a member of Fidesz, then a liberal anti-communist party. After leaving politics in 1994 and working at the Council of Europe for 15 years, she returned to politics in 2012 in a new centrist party, Together. In the framework of the Europe's Future program at the Institute of Human Sciences in Vienna, Zsuzsanna conducted research on the impact of populism and the backsliding of democracy on the future of the EU, which is also in the focus of her new book, Tainted Democracy, Viktor Orbán and the Subversion of Hungary, published in January 2023.
So the best way to describe your book, Zsuzsanna, is that it's an anatomy of Orbán's regime. You explain it inside out. So let's start from the beginning. You were one of the founders of the Federation of Young Democrats, Fidesz, Orbán's party.
So thank you very much for being invited. It's really great that I can talk to you. It's a great pleasure for me. Fidesz was a very interesting group of people in 1988. This was a time when Hungary was already kind of softening, liberalizing. The regime itself was opening, obviously because of a serious economic crisis and also the kind of weakening of the Soviet system. And in 1988, a number of opposition organizations were already formulated in Hungary, though none of them were parties. And of course, we didn't know what actually would happen 2 years later. Fidesz was a youth group coming from a youth college, a law college, a law school. So it was a very conscious bunch of people, very political minded, and very diverse. And when it was established by 33 people, within a couple of weeks, hundreds and hundreds of young people were joining to Fidesz. And it was really super democratic. There was not even a set of leadership at the beginning, but spokespersons, because of course this was a careful measure for the retortion of the regime. So, but of course, there were leading figures, and Orbán was one of them. But he was not the only one. And there were all kinds of styles, and there were more moderate people, there were more soft or more intellectual. So Fidesz was very, very well balanced. And of course, it was a fascinating, good mood, despite of all kind of soft repression, which the regime tried out, which actually didn't last really long. Within 1 year, in 1989, things have dramatically changes, as everyone knows. And the specificity of Fidesz was that it was a generation party.
So well, you mentioned 1989, and one can say a foundational moment in Orbán's career was when he delivered the historic speech at the reburial of Imre Nagy and the martyrs of the 1956 revolution. This is how I see it, one of those moments in history when, had he not been given the chance to speak, everything might have turned out differently for Orbán. And I must tell you, I was told in preparation for this interview that there were actually two candidates to deliver that speech. A young and charismatic Orbán and another young and charismatic female leader of Fidesz.
Yeah.
So who was that?
Yes. So actually, we really prepared for this opportunity. This was a big moment, an agreement between the regime, the then the communist regime and the opposition in '89, in summer '89. And the compromise of the deal was that it's a memorial event. So every speeches were asked to be kind of memory of '56 revolution. And if that was the case in terms of Fidesz, then probably it would have been me who talked. But we very quickly decided to give a political speech, which was actually breaking the rules. And then from that moment, it was quite obvious that there is someone necessary who have the assertivity and courage to actually break the rule and give a political speech. But we knew that this was an absolutely fascinating opportunity, and it was very, very quickly decided that Orbán will give the speech, and I also agreed with that. I probably were not aware as him that what a great opportunity it is, because obviously by his speech, which was the ever first event in Hungary when the larger public could see that there is actually an opposition, because it was broadcasted in the television, then his name was memorable as from that moment. So yes, that definitely, I think he still lives on this momentum in his life, at least his name.
And you write about it in your book. There is about what he said actually about so tell us about that, about the retreat of the Soviet troops and the little, let's say, trick that he played because of the information that you had in preparation for that event about what's going to happen anyways.
So the speech was basically about, it was a provocation to the regime in terms of the leading personalities of the Communist or Socialist Party were sitting at the first row at this memorial event. And the main message of Orbán's speech, which we put together, so the whole Fidesz leadership, was that communism and socialism cannot be democratic. They might try to democratize, but actually it's an authoritarian regime. And if there is no multi-party elections, there is no democracy. And this was absolutely the essence of the speech. But he also gave something important. Basically, he mentioned that the Soviet troops should leave Hungary in order that the Hungary got really sovereign and responsible for its own. This was the kind of groundbreaking element of the speech. This is what most people remembered. And then the trick was that actually by the time these Soviet troops were actually leaving Hungary, and this was because of there was a deal between Gorbachev and the Hungarian socialist leadership to withdraw the troops because they were just basically too expensive to manage them. But no one spoke about that because this was a kind of face-saving exercise for the socialist regime. So Orbán basically taught something unspeakable, and this was a revelatory momentum.
And in the first free election campaign that came a year after, in 1990, you ran with a catchy slogan, "Listen to your heart, vote for Fidesz." And you won a then incredible 9% of the vote. And I can only imagine the feeling of joy and excitement of entering into the parliament for the first time after decades of the communist one-party rule.
Yeah, well, the campaign itself was fascinating. I think there's a lot of people who remember this as kind of probably the best moment in the entire period of regime change, which was, super positive, and in case of Fidesz, very funny as well. We were not sure at all that we can get into the parliament. It was absolutely unclear. No one knew how this whole campaign would work. But we made it, and 22 of us, which was the smallest fraction, But, from zero to being in this historic momentum was really a great opportunity for Fidesz and for many of us to shape the profile of the new democratic system.
And then came the first ruptures in the years after that. And in your book, you cite different reasons for why the relationship in the Fidesz parliamentary group leadership started to become sour. So what were these reasons actually? What turned out wrong?
So from the moment we go to parliament and Fidesz become a professional political party, we started to reshape the profile of the party. It became a bit more hierarchic. Obviously, serious decisions had to be made. So kind of more a smaller leadership was established and set up to do. And of course, Fidesz received, like every other party, resources, building, money. We had staff to be able to run the parliament work. So that we basically altogether we had started to have more resources, and this obviously was followed with a kind of more competition for the positions, for the money. This mainly created personal competitions among leading figures within the party, but there were political tensions as well, because Fidesz originally decided itself as a centrist party, which does not follow the kind of very polarized system of the time of the 20th century, which often created, kind of dead-end streets for Hungary. So we thought we are a centrist party. And there was another centrist liberal party, there's Alliance of Free Democrats, and the coalition with the other liberal party was a stress factor. So I think this was a strategic issue, how far we should cooperate with the other liberal party or actually go on our own. Obviously, Orbán was one of the more radical person who soon came to the conclusion that we have to go on our own. And
in your book, if I'm not mistaken, you basically cite as the major reason for that, for not wanting to go with the other liberal party, was that Orbán wouldn't have been the leader of that coalition.
Most probably, yes. Because there were very substantial political figures. The other liberal party was the one which grew from the democratic opposition, very repressed, very highly qualified intellectuals of the 1980s. So obviously in this competition, or if there was a cooperation, a stronger cooperation, Orbán could not have achieved so easily to be the number one person. Like within Fidesz, he actually could manage this over the first couple of years.
Why did Orbán and his closest circle decide to go that way, actually, to the right? What was them? Because you said initially everything about Fidesz was basically rejecting the traditional polarization of, not only Hungarian but many Western societies, and then he decides to change that original course. And what was the main reason for that?
Well, I think he gave up on this very quickly, probably earlier than we realized. That was one of the reasons, was this very pragmatic or opportunist consideration that with the other liberal parties he could not win. But I think there was another thing. Just like me, Orbán also were traveling around in the early 90s. We learned about the political systems in the US and in most of Europe. And I think he realized that liberals in Central Europe, in mainland Europe, I would say, never lead governments. There are liberal leaders in government leading position in the Northern European countries, but not really, never in Germany or Austria or even in Italy. So those countries which political culture is somewhat closer to our closer to them, he just realized that from the center he could not really make a big party. That created a big tension within Fidesz. Basically, a lot of people who still kept this centrist idea, which as a historic mission of the party, we left the party in 1994. It was a significant number of people. The Fidesz lost badly the election in 1994. It means that it got less votes than 4 years earlier. However, Fidesz was extremely popular by 1993. So this shift in political profile, this definitely didn't work out, at least on the short run. He pulled the party without any opposition to the right. It was quite an incredible move. And he started to go to church and speak in forum of conservative intellectuals. So it was a very conscious move to be accepted on the right among voters and also these institutional or social actors like the Catholic Church, for example. So this is very interesting, and also it's telling a lot of things about Orbán even today, because the thing is that he had a political tactic or a strategic move, and he could build up an ideology on top of it. He can do it at any time. So there's often time of debate whether Orbán is an opportunist or he believes what he's saying. It's not really different. Well, he's always looking for room for maneuver to get bigger, to use the opportunities, and then he creates a story around it. And we can see this ever since, but this was done first in the late 1990s when Fidesz reprofiled itself as a conservative party very successfully. By 1998, Fidesz was the strongest party on the right, and by 2002, he was the absolute leader of the right in Hungary.
Yeah, but in 2002, Fidesz loses the elections.
Yes.
But you write about it in your book, but it had built not only this political support on the right that you're saying, but also a considerable financial cushion, helping them survive in the opposition. So what I found very interesting from that period, and you write about it extensively in your book, is this 70-30% deal between the government, the socialist-led government, and the Fidesz in the opposition. So tell us about that.
Well, the other thing, what I mentioned, that Orbán also very early realized that it's not only the political strengths and power is very much about how you control the resources. So he always managed money and political ideas and tactics together. Orbán had a friend from his school years, Mr. Simicska and Lajos Simicska, and they basically managed this money-making business and political business together. And the techniques they used were actually very typical for the time, I think, not only in Hungary and not only for all parties, but basically in the entire region, because we did not have much resources. There were no capital in the post-communist countries, right? There were no moving capital. We needed FDI from abroad. So the money, what you had was with the state. So political forces really took as much money out of the state as possible. And when Fidesz became the leading force on the right and the Socialist Party on the left of the political spectrum, in the 2000s, the years of 2000s, there was a kind of equilibrium in terms of corruption, we can say this openly. And then the parties which were on power, basically they agreed on how much money they take out from each, let's say, public tender or municipality tender. And they shared it. So the party which was in power got like 70%, and the one that's opposition got 30% of it. All parties create their companies, and these were also in the state and the national level, and also at municipality level. So also at municipality level, lots of public money was outsourced, and through being overpriced, the extra money was a corruption money, and this was distributed among the political parties. This was a kind of relatively balanced system. Well, this has all changed in 2010, when Fidesz, after the financial crisis and after 8 years of socialist-led government in Hungary, won this huge majority, and basically Fidesz stopped this system, and every money now ever since goes to Fidesz only, which is a quite a fascinating story. And Orbán even got rid of Szelényi a couple of years later.
I wanted to ask you directly about that split a bit later, but maybe before. Yes, you say they came to power in 2010 with this extraordinary constitutional 2/3 majority with their coalition partners. And from then on, many would say Hungary progressively stops being a democracy. Would you agree with that statement? How would you qualify that radical change that occurred then?
When he received this landslide victory, which it makes sense to stop here for a moment, because it was 52%, so it is a big majority, but it's not an absolute. It's an absolute majority in parliament, but because of the Hungarian political system is rather majoritarian, and this was already a problem earlier years, but never corrected. This 52% victory for one party meant that Fidesz became a constitutional power. They received 67% of the parliamentary mandate, which means that they could change the constitution, and basically Fidesz could legislate on its own. And that is something extraordinary. And I think it's important to mention that never more than 52% of Hungarians supported Fidesz party. So it's not true that this country, everyone loves Orbán. It's because of our system is so imbalanced and so distorted that even with 45%, which was in 2014, you can get a supermajority in a parliament. So that is just unbelievable strength. And basically, if you do not have a somewhat consolidated opposition, this is really easy to make an authoritarian state.
The split with Szelényi comes at approximately the same time when Orbán's anti-immigration campaign gained speed. Along came the anti-Soros campaign, anti-civil society campaigns, and were there any links between the two processes? Because you do hint on it in the book. And also, can you tell us about all these campaigns that are already very well known in Europe, but we are interested at the political side of it. Why did it come about?
Yeah, so I think that definitely there was some link, because these things were happening at the same time between 2015 and 2018. These were the years when Orbán was fighting. Szelényi was trying to get back some of his power, and so there were the fight between the two men, which was public because Szelényi had media outlets. So he changed the profile of these media outlets from Orbánist to kind of critical. Very interesting period in Hungary's media history. And of course, this was a time when then the migration crisis hit Hungary, and obviously this huge anti-migration propaganda, which Orbán built up very early, unsurprisingly early, probably also served to make a shadow on this very critical period with Szelényi, which I would say probably most Hungarians didn't realize. So it was a power struggle, and people who were watching politics carefully could see this and actually follow it closely. But the majority of Hungarians didn't ever heard probably about this fight and things. So because partly because there was this migration issue. But already then Orbán made a speech in Paris, actually, around the terror attack on Charlie Hebdo newspaper in France, when a lot of journalists were killed. And he went to this demonstration. And at the airport, when he was coming back, he said that until he is the prime minister of Hungary, this country would never let illegal migrants coming to this country. And this was a very surprising speech, because it was only 3 months later that the Balkan route of the migration route or refugee crisis actually hit Europe. So Orbán definitely used this as a preparation for some kind of campaign, and also used the opportunity that anti-migration propaganda is very efficient. I think he learned this more from Western right-wing parties, radical right parties, who for 1 or 2 decades basically grow up on the narrative of anti-migration, which was never a real story in Eastern Europe, because we were never immigrant countries. Our people are always leaving this region, and you know this very well, and we also know this very well. So this was really surprising, and how he managed to change this and use this opportunity, even when the crisis was over, and transform it to this conspiracy theory against George Soros and all these organizations, NGOs.
Yeah. And the year before the migration crisis in 2014 elections, you were elected to the Hungarian parliament for the second time in your life, and this time as an MP of the opposition coalition, EGIT, together. Tell us about those years, because you were really at the forefront of this struggle against this anti-migration, anti-democratic madness that was going on in Hungary, in Orbán's Hungary in those years.
I think that the most difficult thing when I was in parliament in these years was there was something new coming every day. We really were just following what Orbán was coming up. By the time, or actually in these years when this was the fight with Simička, Orbán created an actual propaganda center in the Prime Minister's office. It was not so centralized in the years before, but basically the political narratives, both for the party and the government, were centralized in the years of 2015, 2016, and they also pulled together a lot of medium, which they continually bought up, oftentimes with a very aggressive manner. So the largest Hungarian dailies, online news portals, even one of the largest private television channel was bought up by the cronies of Orbán, and they started to edit these programs together. And this propaganda machinery was basically built up and become incredibly efficient. And we just couldn't really do anything with it. So that was really a shocking experience day and day, and how strongly harmonized it was, and how the Fidesz people for 3 years didn't speak of anything else. I mean, in parliament, if you had questions or you discussed whatever law which were of the session of parliament or table to the parliament, whatever it was about, Fidesz spoke about anti-migration. It was just absolutely nonsense.
Yes, and another very similar thing, and I want to talk about it now, is Orbán's foreign policy, especially in the circumstances of the Russian aggression on Ukraine. It is shocking to the extent that Hungary positions itself differently from most EU member states, and I think our country is very similar in that respect. So regarding the foreign policy in the early days, Fidesz, when you were there, was resolutely a pro-European party, and your 1991 foreign policy program entitled Towards a New Type of Sovereignty was all centered around the European unification. Now, fast forward to 2007, 3 years before Fidesz came back to power, Fidesz was still holding this, pro-Western course. While still in the opposition, Orbán criticized the socialist-led government because he believed that they were too close to Russia. And I read this quote from your book, from Orbán, where he says, "Oil might come from the east, but freedom always comes from the west." And Orbán now is one of the staunchest allies of Kremlin in Europe. So can you explain why?
So, yes, Orbán, even in 2007, 2008, called his party, Fidesz, like the new European generation. It's quite fascinating how he has changed so quickly when he got to power in 2010. I think he very quickly announced a new regime. Internally in the party, there was a lot of problem around because he wanted his people to accept that Fidesz will be more open to China and Russia. And this took some years until his own people could, swallow this and digest. It was only in 2014 when Orbán openly named this shift in political shift, and he said Eastern opening. But he started it much earlier. He already started it in 2010, and it doesn't really interesting what he's saying, but basically the reason behind is that he thought that the world is not so rule-based. He realized that after the 2008 crisis, the West was somewhat shaking. And because he's an incredible risk-taker, and he's a very reckless politician, and he had a very strong position in Hungary with the supermajority, he thought that he could revolver the European Union and the Western partners if he's opening towards the West, towards the East, primarily with business. And he hoped that he would not be so dependent on mainly finances from the European allies. Well, Hungary had a huge loan after the crisis from the World Bank and the IMF and also the European Union. So Orbán made every effort to pay this back, which was happening in 2013. And ever since, he tries to, he built room for maneuvering. So it's not ideological, or at least it was not ideological at the beginning. It's a question of what it is today, because obviously these Eastern regimes are autocratic regimes. And it's also more blurry and not so rule-based and more informal how one can make business with these countries. I think he started this Eastern opening to room for maneuver. It's not very successful actually until now, but he's still continuing with this because he believed that this is now possible, that the world is not so strict and the West is not so strong. And the thing is that for many years he was actually right. And he could do this without any kind of consequences. And the European Union only in 2010 or 20, so 10 years after Orbán's policy, made the first significant steps, which in the form of putting some or adding some conditionality to new funds from the EU. But obviously this whole policy is a real risk now that there is this war. And I think many of us expected Orbán to somewhat move back to normal track, to a pro-European track after the war broke out by Russia in Ukraine. But after 1 year of the war, we can say that he didn't. And Orbán is still trying to maneuver between Russia and the West and the European Union position. And this is really a worrying phenomena, because, of course, we do not know whether this is just a similar maneuvering, and Orbán expects that eventually there will be some kind of ending of the war and negotiations, and he can benefit from his position, which is that he's not completely committing Hungary to Ukraine, or he can't, because he has certain dependencies on Russia that he basically cannot act freely any longer, and this is very distressing for Hungary. I mean, both is quite dramatic, because what we see so far is that Europe holds together, and Hungary is incredibly isolated with Orbán's position. But I think he still counts on that, at some point he will be true. And I think this is a similar strategy that what he did with the migration crisis. He took a huge risk with communicating an anti-migrant narrative. And over the time, most European countries actually got stricter in terms of managing migration. And he says that he was true, and he was the only one who dared to say the truth, and no one else managed. And he actually became a strong person. He became an international actor and player in the world in 2015 and afterwards. So I think he has a similar expectation. He believes that the war will end, Russia will not be completely ruined, or even Russia wins this war some way, because the West will give up its commitment because of various reasons, because of fatigue, or because of Trumpist Republican coming to the U.S. So various reasons, and he will be, the person who told the only real truth.
Immoral and very risky game.
Absolutely.
His foreign policy at
Very
the
risky
moment,
game.
Which you call, if I'm not mistaken, in the book, peacock dance. You actually quote their words there. You talked about the complacency of European complacency for Orbán that lasted for a very long time, and it may now had come to an end, but for years Orbán was provided shelter from his former political family, the European People's Party, and you write about Orbán's government giving German manufacturers with plants in Hungary extremely good conditions, and how, for example, German automotive industry in Hungary stopped advertising in independent media not to upset Orbán as a result. And you list quite a number of very interesting anecdotes in that respect in your book. So I wonder if you want to tell us about this phenomenon as well.
Yeah, well, definitely this was a case. I mean, Orbán was in the European People's Party, the Conservative Party family, and there were strong allies of Orbán, and there were strong opposition, especially the Benelux and the Nordic countries, who criticized his politics from early on. And it was very much the CDU, the German Christian Democrat and Christian Socialist Party, which were hesitant for years to actually stand up against Orbán. And I think there's many various reasons why did they stoop, but obviously Orbán nurtured a lot of German companies which are present in Hungary. These companies, mainly in the automotive industry and machine industry, are very critical for Hungary because they produce a significant part of Hungarian export. So that is very important for us. And while other companies were pushed out from the countries, these companies, mainly German, American, French, were provided a lot of resources. So there was a lot of deal with the CDU, but I would say that Orbán is managing a reasonable relationship, or tried with some certain governments which are important for Hungary, and because of these were mainly conservative governments, this was rather easy for him, and he always talked about this as a kind of ideological issue, and he portrayed the conflict only with the left-wing government and political forces in Europe, and this was very handy and comfortable for the CDU, because they would say, "Oh, this is an ideological issue," but of course it's not. I mean, this is an autocratic state, and I think by now, at least I hope, that a number of conservative or right-wing parties in Europe, which are in the center right, do understand that there is a threat, because it's easier to autocratize from a right-wing position than from the left, and typically in Europe these are the right-wing parties which become autocratic, and this is a real threat for the centrist conservative groups as well. So I'm not sure whether there is enough awareness, but I hope there is already by now, and it's not only in Germany, but in other countries like France, for example, or Italy.
And to end this fascinating talk, and I want to ask you another thing, because you write how Orbán's now 12-year-long rule hijacked Hungary's democratic development. And you use a really brilliant sentence to describe what this is about: the long-term civilizing process of the formation of the independent middle class. But in many conversations I got, many of our conversations, I was convinced that you do not surrender. And here I'm not asking you when, because that's very difficult to predict, but how does Orbán's regime eventually end? Tell us a hypothetical scenario for that.
Well, we don't know how it will end. I suppose because of we just know some things from history, and these regimes typically decline or break when there are internal and external factors. So we don't know when would this happen, and we actually don't know whether this would happen, with at an election time or independently from that. What is probably foreseeable that there will be a very difficult situation when this regime breaks, because it's so much a one-man show. Despite Orbán is an institution builder, and he is creating a new elite which is loyal to him. If he's not there, nothing works. No money channels, and then these competing political figures and forces and interest in his parties will probably go against each other. So it will be a complicated situation for the opposition and for whatever remains from Fidesz. So it's difficult to imagine, but I think what we have to prepare is to, first of all, maintain decency and civilization and normalcy wherever it's possible. Make alliances with those who you can do so. Majority of Hungarians are actually apolitical, so they don't like this system. They just don't dare to stand up, or they they don't see they can do any difference. So I think, any reasonable forces or new elite, which is there, can make a better country. But the moral destruction, the moral subversion, what Orbán is doing is really something which is harmful, and I think that will take a longer period to set or reconstruct the morality of the Hungarian, society.
The book ends with hope that the next generation will fulfill this task in Hungary. I really do hope so. And this whole conversation has been an incredible allegory, in a way, to our own situation in Serbia. And I just would love to see this book, your book, Zsuzsa, translated in Serbian and the bookshelves or of our bookshops here. So I hope this will happen. And thank you very much for your time and for giving us this incredible insight into Orbán's rule in Hungary. Thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting me, Srdjan.